like video.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is Craft of the Cards. This series is fundamentally focused on grading the art of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, looking at the aesthetics of the art, how well it syncs up to the effect, and how it relates to the card name. We work through the archetypes in alphabetical order, started off at a random point, which in this case was U. We grade the cards out of 5, with 5 being an excellent card in both theming and effect, and 1 being a waste of cardboard and man-hours. This time, we'll be filling in the backlog a bit, because I'm pretty sure this archetype stopped getting support, with Vendreads. The theme of this archetype comes off really strong in concept, a ritual zombie deck, but while I would have liked maybe to see the ritual aspects of the card played into more with more overtly fantastical designs, the urban theme works surprisingly well, especially as a reference to the Resident Evil franchise, which I don't actually know a lot about, so don't expect too much of a dive into the references to that franchise in this review. This archetype does, however, have a heaping dose of internal lore along with everything else, and some of the best artwork in recent memory. I honestly love this archetype, and I hope that they get more support released, though preferably before this video actually goes out so I can make sure this isn't too out of date, because they are just almost perfection with every single card. So, without further ado, let's slip some mutagens into the water, start an apocalypse, and take a look at Vendreads. Vendread anima is their first monster, which is pretty interesting for its connection to Vendread lore. It very well might be the girlfriend of Vendread's Slayer, given the locket around her neck. Art-wise, the card is really nice, with the next card, Vendread Core, being very visible in the center, and the rest of the monster slowly forming out of the mists around it. I really like it, because it shows how the human is eventually modified and changed even more by the magics of the core, the hands slowly turning into wings on the side. It's a nice touch, and we can see the silhouette of the final form in the bottom center. I really like the purple used in this card. The fading to white gives it a nice gradient that helps to seem a little more textured than other cards. The background is fine enough, with the red and black background styles not being terrible, but not adding a lot to the card like some backgrounds on other cards in the future. It does make it seem more incomplete though, the full monster not yet manifested, merely coming together in a bizarre parodic fusion of a person and magics to form the monster. The name syncs up really nicely with the effect as well, as most Vendread monsters have effects that banish them and other monsters from the grave in order to activate further effects, and it would make sense that a monster whose name is a derivation of animus, or soul, would be able to manipulate that fact. Beyond that, it may have some lore implications as to how Vendread Executor gets formed later on. This is a generally solid card, all things considered, and while it's not spectacular in any way, it really gets the job done for what it sets out to accomplish. For that, it gets a solid 3 out of 5. Not a bad start at all. We'll move on to their next monster with Vendread Core, fittingly enough being the center of all their monsters. The art for this card is really awesome, the aforementioned core at the center, with twisted ribbons of flesh around it all coalescing into a monster. I especially like how it seems to be showing how it's the core of multiple monsters, with the wings of Striges, the tentacles of Chimera, and the hands of Revenants. Furthermore, almost all of the Vendread and Revendread monsters either have some form of blue eyes in the same color as the core, or have the core visible, which I thought was a really nice touch. The background is really nice, and while I would have liked to see something maybe a bit more involved, the black and blue help to highlight the core at the center, and the blue bloom allows for the flesh to stand out nicely and not blend in too much with the glow of the core. The effect is really nice as well, allowing you to resummon it by getting rid of a monster in your grave, showing out how it could be taken from old monsters and used in new ones. It also allows for the protection if used for a ritual summon of a monster, which makes sense given that it should have some benefit of being used as a catalyst for a ritual. This is another excellent card in the archetype, but it's slightly better than Anima, so it gets a 4 out of 5. Their next monster is Vendread Striges, an excellent card with some really strong theming and mythological references. According to Ovid, Striges were birds that would disembowel infants and feed on their blood, which, given the appearance of these monsters, would not seem too far of a concept. I love the artwork of this card. Every single bird is uniquely different and horrifying, from Mr. Six Speaks out at the front to Johnny Three-Step over in the back and Noodle Neck down in the front. The variety of design for these cards is simply superb and gives them a real sense of being cobbled together from multiple different organisms, jammed together without how much thought of how it would work as a whole, and then made to by magic. The design on the multi-beaked horror is probably my favorite of the bunch, really showing how messed up the archetype can be. I love how you can see even more beaks starting to sprout from the feathers around his neck, with the purple tongues extruding from other points helping to break up the coloration, and the multi-wing design in general is really nice. The others are no slouch either, the many-headed horror of the bird in the background and the multi-clawed green bird in the background all being interesting variations. I love how they aren't monochrome as well, allowing for the red, green, and purple design that gives them so much more variety, rather than all being similar. The outline helps to bring them into the foreground, but the background for this card is another aspect that I love. The impact lines help to emphasize the cry of the birds, but the city in the background just provides such a nice element of character, allowing them to be underlit and imposing even as they swoop in the air. The effect is fine enough, allowing you to special summon it when it hits the grave, reflecting quite nicely the ability of Vendread monsters to replace themselves with more of the same. It also gets an effect when used for a ritual, like most Vendreads, allowing you to draw and discard. Overall, the last effects are fairly bog standard, but art-wise, this just makes me so happy. This is an amazing card for the art alone. I love how varied and unique these designs are, and it easily gets a 4 out of 5. Aw, aren't these some cute doggies? Oh, don't get too enthusiastic there. In all seriousness, Vendread Houndhorde, nice name by the way, once again hits it out of the park with inventive, varied designs that really display the creativity of people working on these. Never before have I been more mad at Konami's insistence not letting us know who these artists are, mostly because now I can't go and give the world's most enthusiastic blowjob to whoever designed these cards. This card is excellent, with the glowing eyes and the insane designs of the monsters. The most disappointing is probably the monster at the very top, merely having more eyes than usual and the elongated fangs, but the other two visible monsters are amazing, with the middle one having the scariest mouth I've seen in a while, gaping open with a disconnected jaw and the amazing looking back spikes. The bottommost monster is probably the one that gets me going the most, though, with the jaws in place of his ears and the stubby, multi-leg design with loose skin around his legs, like all the flesh in his body was sucked out. The shadows in the back, with the eyes piercing through, are just amazing, and the moon as a whole highlights the onrushing pack so nicely, with the pale light contrasting with the glowing eyes. The effect is once again really nice, with the usual recovery effect. While I would have liked to see a searching effect, I like that when it's used for ritual summon, you can banish a spell or trap card, seeming to ferret out the secrets of your opponent as would be appropriate for a pack of hounds. This is another excellent card and easily deserves a 5 out of 5. The sheer creativity on display with these just perfect. Vendread Revenants, on the other hand, is somewhat disappointing. It lacks any of the more fun elements that Houndhorde and Striges has, mostly changing up between monsters with various flavors of mutated hands. It's fine enough, but I really would have liked to see maybe a ribcage opened up as a jaw, or anything that didn't seem to so disappointingly repeat itself. The background is flat and boring, with little depth and lighting, mostly being represented by the same vague out-of-view glow in the background. Honestly, it's kind of disappointing. What little I like mostly does come down to the designs though, with the elongated hands and nails for both man and woman on the card. I think they could have gone much further though, and I'm kinda sad that they didn't. The effect is fine enough, allowing you to resurrect a monster as per usual, if used for a ritual summon, banish an opponent's monster. The last one is especially interesting, maybe suggesting that it has a voodoo-like link to the other monsters, and its subsumation into a greater whole might cause it to fail. In the end, it's just a decent card that, in any other archetype, would be perhaps really awesome, but for Vendreads is rather disappointing. It gets a 3 out of 5. In the end, not much more than average despite some interesting elements. We move on to their first ritual monster, Vendread Chimera, and boy oh boy is this one amazing as well. The design is just pure, horrifying perfection that jammed together horrors of several other Vendread monsters jumbled up into a big pile to form a massively malformed grotesquerie. I love how you can even pick apart some of the influences of the design, with the wings of some of the Striges popping out of the shoulder, and the even more malformed face of the Jaw Dog from Houndhorde on its back. I love how they designed the mouth as well, with the teeth lining the flappy jaws, and the drool we can see seeping from its mouth all goes to imply a sloppy, horrifying beast with no real purpose but to consume and destroy. The choice to show where the flesh of different monsters end by making sure that we can see it change color is a good one, showing the seeming lack of care as to the monster's assemblage. And the face looming out from the stomach and the line of teeth coming down to meet it is just amazing. I love how well the core is reminiscent of an eye, and the crown of teeth surrounding the head is just another amazing touch. I love everything about this card's artwork, and it does much to excuse the fact that, unfortunately, both the background and effect are once again somewhat lacking. The background is a regular dark miasma with a nice bloody pool underneath the monster, which, while a nice touch, doesn't really do much to mitigate the fact that this is just an okay card in terms of background effect. The effect is mostly generic, with no special link to the name or appearance. I would have loved to see a card which gained effects depending on how many monsters you put into it, but I realized that would probably be borderline unplayable due to how terrible it would be. In the end, I like how if used for the summon of another ritual monster, it gets a parting shot, perhaps representing the volatility of a monster exploding over your opponent as its components are used for a more coherent summon. It's a really awesome card despite that though. On the strength of its artwork alone, it gets a 5 out of 5. Simply magnificent. Next up, we have Vendreads Slayer, the guy whose lore we'll be diving into much deeper once we hit the spell trap lineup. His name works pretty well with that lore, his whole purpose to get back at the monsters which stole everything from him. His art is pretty nice, all things considered, taking a not inconsiderable amount of influence from Spawn, the Image Comics character known much more for his terrible movies, sadly, than his pretty good comics. The design in this case is really nice, the flames around his eyes making a nice contrast to the black face, and it all blends really nicely with his ridiculously long scars. Those actually work quite nicely as well, helping to lend him a bit of presence that would otherwise be lacking given his slimmer overall profile, as well as lend a nice sense of motion to the card, which is not an easy thing to do with a still image. The color scheme is really cool, the yellow and black acting as natural contrast to one another, and the white skull in the middle helps it from looking too strange, and also puts me in mind of the Punisher just a tad. The spider legs and blades are some of the most esoteric elements, but they do well in making him look a lot more corrupted. A Vendread monster turned back from servitude by burning rage, or perhaps even self-mutated in order to revenge himself for those he lost. I like that he looks appreciably different from the other monsters, more cohesive in a lot of ways, especially next to monsters like Hound Horde and Chimera. It's a neat little trick they use to differentiate him, and it works out pretty well. If there's one element I would question, it's the spikes on his shoes. While the ones on his hands and the spider legs on his back are mostly fine, I fail to see an instance in which he would ever be able to use the foot spikes meaningfully without somehow hurting himself. The background is really nice as well, finally getting something more visually interesting than the generic gradients of the previous monsters. The city is a nice touch and shows that this takes place in the modern day rather than the past, and helps to reinforce his image of a brooding anti-hero. The effect works well with the ability to banish monsters from the grave in order to bump up his attack, showing perhaps his use of the resources that other Vendread monsters leave behind in order to empower himself. This is a really cool card and gets a 5 out of 5. The strength of the design manages to carry it up pretty far, and in conjunction with the rest of the lore, it easily clears the bar. Vendread Battlelord looks absolutely badass. It's a massive skull demon made from the ossified remains of other humans, and a massive cleaver made up of even more skeletons. It probably wouldn't look too out of place on an Iron Maiden album cover, and maybe it's just my own weakness for massive over-the-top edginess, but this looks really cool. Again, I like how this, clearly meant to be the boss of the Vendreads, is a lot more carefully put together than the other monsters. A lot of elements about this design really get me going. The massive tusk pauldrons, the human skulls with horns as knee pads, and the visible core in his center, and the glowing, flaming eye crowned by two massive satanic horns. The stance is low and menacing, with a sword held out in front of him confrontationally, which makes a lot of sense, and also helps to give him a sense of weight, seeming to have a lot of heft that other monsters like Slayer would lack. The black cloak, all tattered in the back, looms out from behind him, giving him a much larger profile as well, nicely making him seem even more massive and imposing. The background is actually quite nice, all blue mist, which works pretty well with the fact that ritual cards are blue, and helps to make it just seem a little more ethereal and menacing. I like how the entire card is also color graded slightly blue, just enough to make the bones seem off-white, as it really helps to lend the sense of mystery and power around the card. The effect sadly doesn't really do much for me, lacking a battle-oriented effect that one might indeed expect of a card called Vendread Battlelord. Corresponding nicely to that, however, is the fact that it has no defense value, making sense given its combative name. It's a good card altogether and gets a 5 out of 5, mostly just for the amazing art design. Their final monster is a combination of Vendread Battlelord and Slayer, Vendread Executor. This card is even more badass, and one of the best examples of two guards merging together into something new. It takes the over-the-top amazingness of Battlelord and just stuck it into Slayer, ossifying his chest piece and massively growing his spider legs and pauldrons so they look like they make him too top-heavy to move. I love what they've done with it, the skull design on his chest turned into an actual skull with red around the jaw. I like the color change as well, the yellow and black giving way to a much more more aggressive red and blue color scheme, with the red shooting through the massively oversized claws and extending in burning trails from his eyes. The blue helps to break it up nicely, the scarf once again whipping through the air to give it a sense of motion. I like how the stance has changed as well. In Vendreads Slayer, he appeared much more cocky and upright, hands boldly extended to pick someone's nose, but in this one he's lower to the ground, on guard and more animalistic, taking the lessons he's learned from his time fighting in the city, and perhaps even subsuming some of Battlelord's instincts. The background helps to accomplish this, the previous cool blues giving way to a hazy red, the card seeming much more active and deadly than previous incarnations. The effect is fine enough, still reflecting its zombie nature through its effect when destroyed, allowing you to fetch more from the deck, and I like how this is still treated as Vendreads Slayer, showing that he's still in control of this form to a certain extent, not Battlelord. This is an awesome, over-the-top design that I just adore, and the fact that its effect isn't directly anti-thematic means that I'll give this card another 5 out of 5. Just absolute perfection after perfection. Moving on to the spell and trap lineup, we'll be going from the lore timeline, or as close as I can figure it, so we'll start off with Vendread Reorigin when it comes to the lore. It's a nice nod to the card's name, them re-originating from the grave into hideous unlife. We can see in the background the monsters starting to rise from the grave, and the next card seems to imply that some sort of tragedy on the part of Slayer, which would require the presence of zombies in the first place to occur. I like the art on this card. We get to see the relatively normal bodies of the revenants emerging before the mutations that we can start to see overtaking them and the other cards become too prominent. I'm a little wary of how Wolverine-like the hands on this guy look. I would have much rather liked to see a more detailed view of the hand that we see in the background over there, all starting to warp and twist. I like how we can see the magic animating them in full force, exploding out of the grave with arcane might, while blue fire burns in their eyes. It goes a long way to make them seem more imposing, even as what are essentially mooks. The background is nice as well. I appreciate it being set somewhere other than the grey-blue void, and the city background and rows of gravestones are a nice touch. The name also syncs up pretty well with the effect, allowing you to tribute an opponent's monster in order to bring it back as one of your own, matching levels so that the body can be used for a ritual summon. It's a really nice touch, and this synchronicity manages to overcome some of the less appealing aspects of the art and give it a 5 out of 5. Their next card is Vendread Origin, showing how Vendread Slayer came to be. In this, we can see him grabbing his face as bone spikes start to emerge from his back, and the process to mutate him into Vendread Slayer starts to take place, with the eyes starting to spurt red and glowing blue with the light of an implanted core. He's holding a locket, which we get to see on the right of the page, open to show him and his girlfriend, who likely became Vendread Anima. It's competently drawn, all things together, and I would have maybe liked to see a better way of showing that he had a girlfriend and a more ornate ritual circle of some kind turning him into a monster, or maybe just having a corpse off to the side, but this works well enough. The shock of red and blue over his eyes helps to draw our attention to it, ensuring that the opened locket doesn't take up too much of the attention, as it naturally would, being the largest element on the page, and the engorged veins on his arm and face help to make the situation look appropriately stressful for him. The effect is good enough, nicely allowing you to banish monsters from the graveyard in order to summon out a monster, making sense for a zombie ritual. Ultimately, it gets a 3 out of 5. It's nothing too crazy, but also nothing too bad that would annoy me, so in the end, it's merely average. Vendread Knights, on the other hand, looks quite interesting, showing Vendread Slayer leaping into a horde of Vendread Revenants, while lights in the background make sure to give him a good profile. This card is actually pretty nice, showing off the city that the action takes place in, and giving an interesting element to the lore. It looks like only certain areas of the city have been cordoned off by the walls and barbed wire, given the background, and I like how we can see spotlights in the city picking out Slayer in the sky as its starbursts around him. Not only does the color on his outfit make him naturally stand out, but the card goes out of its way to show him cannonballing down towards the Revenants. It's some pretty nice art, and I like how we can see the spider legs outstretched and ready to have a go at the monsters. The effect matches well to the art as well, allowing you to continually destroy monsters if you defeat them, mimicking the fact that Slayer is probably going to go through these ones like a hot knife through butter. It gets a 4 out of 5 in the end. Some good art, but not exceptional a way that makes me perk up and stand to attention, as it were. Next up in the lore timeline, we'll take a move on over to the traps with Vendread Reunion. This, in my opinion, takes place after Vendread Knights, the scraps of the monsters left over by Slayer's rampage coming together to form Chimera. It makes some amount of sense. Chimera being the fusion of a bunch of various parts of Vendread monsters. The art is once again fantastic. Anything related to Chimera is probably going to be such for me, and I love how we can see it slowly twisting into shape, forming around a core in the center as parts and bits of various Vendread monsters fuse into a nightmarish mass. You can see so much more clearly the wings of Striges, the maws of Houndhorde, and the rest all being sklorped up together on one big amorphous ball. I like how we can see Slayer in the background as well, preparing to fight this new enemy. It's a really nice card overall, and despite lacking a background, once again just being plain color, it works well enough. The effect is really nice as well, allowing you to summon back banished monsters in order to help summon out a ritual monster. This makes a lot of sense as Chimera is formed out of the reconstituted remains of other monsters, and is a really nice thematic effect. In the end, a 4 out of 5. Very good, but not quite hitting the point where I start to really quiver with excitement. Vendread Charge looks amazing. Gonna leave that right there. Everything about this card, from the way it looks to the way it's lit, just makes me go. The contrast of the flames underlighting the massive form of Battlelord, the blue glow of their eyes and the core present both in it and Chimera cutting through the darkness. Everything about this card is able to portray the power and sheer terror of the Vendreads, with the low angle and looming bulk of Battlelord implying dominance, and the flaming eye in its head giving us this terrifying image, and the barest of glances just to show how little they care about your life. I love how everything about this card, it captures the amount of terror that these things would inspire. I love how they choose to make it seem so darkly ominous, with the fires providing some of the only source of light, and the red skies we can see in the background give it this hellish glow that just makes me squeal in happiness. The effect works so well with the name as well, allowing you to charge Vendread monsters out of your deck onto the field. In the end, I can't say any more. This card looks amazing. It gets a 5 out of 5, simply fantastic. Their next card shows the initial outcome of the battle between Battlelord and Slayer, and it doesn't seem to be going too well for Slayer. The art on this one's pretty awesome, showing the defeated form of Slayer being drawn into Battlelord's chest by a pack of ghostly arms. It's an interesting idea, and showing maybe Battlelord gains power from defeating his enemies and adding them to his body as he goes along. I like how they drew Slayer in this card, defeated, with the lights in his eyes extinguished and the spider legs and bone spurs broken and cracked, showing just how much Battlelord overpowered him by. I also like how washed out the colors of this costume are as well. The previously bright and vibrant yellows dulled down to an almost grey. I love how they drew Battlelord in this as well, so the dispassionate way he's holding Slayer makes him look more aloof and separate, not even having to work to defeat him so handily. Once again, not a fan of the generic background, but I've harped on that enough in Vendreads, so I'll just quickly move on from there. You probably get I don't like them much at this point, or in any card for that matter. The idea of the ghost arms is really cool as well, and I like how they were visualized in the card, reaching from around the core in Battlelord, with his ribcage opened up to reveal it more fully and trying to draw him in. It's a nice touch and really gives the card a lot more of an ominous feeling. The effect works well enough, allowing you to resurrect a Vendread monster from the grave before special summoning it, and then giving you a ritual spell which you can use to ritual summon a bigger monster with. It fits really well with the art, considering that the lesser ritual monster Slayer is being subsumed into the greater monster Battlelord. In the end, it gets a 4 out of 5, an extremely solid card with good linkage between the art and effect. In Revendread Evolution, however, we can see that he's gotten his second wind somewhat, tearing the core out of Battlelord's unliving body. As opposed to the other card, this one has much more color to it. The yellows of Slayer's uniforms bright and vibrant again to help reflect his renewed power, and the flames of his eyes are once again there, showing the fury he possesses deep inside. I like a lot of the small details of the card, the dissolving arms and ribs of Battlelord showing the ferocity of Slayer. I like how the curvature of the ribs also helps to draw attention to the core held in Slayer's hand, their natural shape almost acting like an arrow to the main point of interest on the card. I like the background again, the bands of white and blue helping to communicate the catastrophic power that's being unleashed around them. The art is really nice. The chaos of the card is helped by a lot of the more thick and heavy line work on this, leaving it a lot more intense than other cards. And the lights shooting off the core and the wild, tattered nature of the combatants really shows it off. The effect is nice as well, allowing you to summon any Vendread ritual, but destroy it during your next turn, showing how, for a monster like Revendread Slayer, this is a last gasp sort of view before he goes to the graveyard. My own personal theory, lore-wise, is how he received this power-up as Anima showed up. The shock of seeing the mist-like body of his girlfriend gave him the motivation to power up and turn the table somewhat. In the end, it gets a 5 out of 5. The artwork, effect, and pairing work very well for this card and make it a true joy to see. Vendread Nightmare is the next card, showing the aftermath of the battle against Battlelord, as Slayer, now Executor, assumedly after integrating the core of Battlelord, is tormented by visions of Animus, seeing her corpse everywhere as he rages against the injustice of it all. It's a really nice connection with the name. Shame the art's a bit worse this time, though. Well, I like certain elements, the purple showing how this is more dreamlike as opposed to the blues and yellows of previous cards, the presence of Anima in the background showing us what's tormenting him, but his own pose in the center is really surprisingly bad. It's too cluttered, and while an Executor's design looked fine enough, in this one it just looks too busy with too many elements going on that just blend into each other and end up disconnecting. In this case, I would have maybe liked to see him a bit bigger, just so we get a clearer view of what he's supposed to be doing. I mean, it was even hard for me to see which bit was his head until I felt a little spurt of flame that will lead him to his eyes. It's the scarf that breaks it up a bit too much for me this time. Whereas before, it would have been a nice addition, this time it just disconnects the card, making it look like his massive spider legs are separated from the card as a whole. Barring that, the effect is really nice, reflecting the abilities he got from Battlelord, powering up a ritual monster after every battle, and allowing you to modulate levels to show the increase in power from certain monsters. It's merely an okay card in the archetype of great ones though, so I can't give it more than a 3 out of 5. Their final card, however, is simply perfection, Vendread Daybreak. This card seems to show the conclusion of Vendread's Slayer, finally giving up all his power as dawn breaks, waiting to die so that he can finally pass on. Everything about this card is incredible, the journey that he started in Vendread Nights finally coming to end with the break of day. I love how we can just see parts of him illuminated by the sun, the rest being cast into stark relief against the light, showing how drenched he is by sin and his lust for revenge. The dissolving of his massive bone legs and the horns slowly going away to reveal the person underneath all looks amazing, and the thematic elements of this card are simply insane. I especially like how he's all up on some rubble, showing that his desire has just led to destruction, but even as that is emphasized, the silhouette of the city looms in the background, showing that he's managed to protect something despite engaging the monsters out of pure revenge. The field nuke effect is nice as well, showing that he is the last one left on the field, but not being able to bring himself to fight much more, not being able to directly attack the opponent. It's a really nice card, and despite the simplicity of the art, it looks amazing. This card is once again a clear 5 out of 5. This archetype as a whole is insane. The ideas present just burst at the seam with an incredible amount of creativity, and you can clearly see the love that they put into so many of these cards. I love this archetype, and so many elements of it work together to create an utterly fantastic set of cards. I had to think really hard about what to make the card of the archetype. I originally thought about Vendread Battlelord, loving the misty, smoky design that just makes it seem more imposing, and then I thought about Daybreak, the perfect card to cap out a story about revenge. But in the end, there could only be one winner, and that is Vendread Charge. So many of the card's elements work together to make it seem so utterly imposing, to make anything you could do seem so helpless against the power of the Vendread army. There's so many good cards though, and I really, really love how much care was put into even small monsters like Striges and Houndhorde, which would normally be left behind as merely being the stuff you put on the field to go into better, more interesting boss monsters. In the end, how can I give this archetype anything other than a 5 out of 5? It's utterly fantastic in almost every respect. I love this archetype. I love its art. I love everything about it. So, that'll about wrap it up. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching my video. Please remember to subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos. And so, without further ado, this is Nuke, signing out.